Today, I'm happy to introduce Forrest Iandola, who's CEO of DeepScale, to the Newton Lecture Series. Forrest took the Newton Lecture Series not too long ago and used to be one of the listeners in class, scheming to start a startup just like the majority of all of you are doing while you listen to our speakers this semester. You now have living proof standing in front of you that it is possible to turn your scheming startup thoughts into a reality. So I hope you enjoy that. Forrest, from an early age, was interested in cars, but found a passion for computers when he got his Bachelor of Science degree in computer science at University of Illinois. He then came to Berkeley to get his PhD in EECS on exploring the design space in deep convolutional neural nets at large scale. There's definitely not easy stuff to work on, and he got it done in only 4 years, so that's really remarkable. Definitely deserves an applause. Now at DeepScale, which spun out of his research work, he works on combining his young passion for cars with his research to work on developing perception system for autonomous vehicles. A pretty hot topic, I would say, right now. So I hope you all enjoy what Forrest has to share with us, and please give him a warm welcome.
Thanks a lot. Great. Thanks for that highly personalized introduction. I didn't actually write any of the words in that, so A+ for that. So yeah, I'm Forrest Iandola. I'm the co-founder and CEO of DeepScale, and as Travis mentioned, I did my PhD right here at Berkeley. Let me first give you 2 or 3 slides on what we do at DeepScale, and then I'll kind of give you the full narrative on how we got to where we are today. There are lots of twists and turns in that story that I think you might enjoy and be able to learn from. So in terms of what we do today at DeepScale, we build what are called perception systems for autonomous vehicles. So we take data from various types of sensors, from cameras to more exotic types of sensors as well, in vehicles in real time, and generate representations of what's going on around the car right now. That's what we do. And in the context of an autonomous vehicle, this is kind of where a perception system fits. So a fully autonomous vehicle requires at least 4 things that a normal car doesn't have, possibly more. But those 4 things are more sophisticated sensors, offline maps, so that's gathering up data from a fleet of deployed vehicles and aggregating that. There's real-time perception, which is what we do. That's figuring out what the dynamic state of the environment is around the car. So at minimum, we have to do recognition of all the things that aren't on the map, and ideally have some redundancy with the map if the map has failed or has mistakes. And then finally, there's path planning and actuation. So path planning is, how do I get the car to go from point A to point B? And actuation is, how do I manipulate the car to actually do that every few milliseconds from point A to point B? So I'll get later to why DeepScale has specialized in the perception piece. But that's where we are, and there are some really cool problems there to solve. So for the rest of the talk, let me do the following. I'm basically going to start out with kind of what I wanted to be when I grow up, and you'll be surprised how similar it is to the way things turned out. I'll go through a bit of my circuitous path through being a PhD student at Berkeley, who's also interested in entrepreneurship and working on various entrepreneurial ideas. That led to the founding of DeepScale, and there will be lots of lessons I've learned along the way that I only wish I could teach my 4, 8, or 16-year younger self these things. So you'll benefit from my hindsight. So as long as I can remember, I've been obsessed with cars, trucks, and wheeled vehicles. So that's me in a pickup truck at age 3 or 4, wishing I could drive. So I happened to grow up on a farm 7 miles from the nearest town, which was 800 people in very rural part of Illinois in the Midwest. And one benefit of growing up on a farm is we had lots of land. And when I was 7 years old, I was old enough to touch the pedals on a go-kart. So I got my first go-kart. When I was 11 or 12, I got my first little tiny motorcycle. I just loved driving. I loved vehicles. And this particular truck was actually one that was used in my parents' business. So my parents had a business which they started when I was 1 year old, and that business is called IES Drilling Supplies. They sell all the things you need if you want to drill a hole in the ground. Now, that might be to create a water well. It might be to create a caisson that'll be used to stabilize a tall building. There are obvious things like drill bits that you need, as well as more non-obvious ones, such as specialized types of sand and clay. So my parents' company sells all that stuff, and fortunately for me, had lots of cool trucks to bring that stuff to customers in. So naturally, with my parents having a business, not only did I want to do something with cars and trucks, I wanted to start my own car company too, or truck company. So always wanted to be an entrepreneur from at least a couple years after I was born. And so I made my parents print up letterhead, T-shirts, stationery for Fo's truck company. So Fo was what I called myself before I could even say my name properly, which kind of gives you a date on all this. So I wanted to start my own truck company, and the first product I wanted to make was the following. So in the 90s, you could get either a full-size heavy-duty pickup truck with, it's for those in the know, it's called a 3/4 ton or a 1-ton truck. You could actually get that with 4 full-size doors. You could basically use it as a car to haul your family around, 4 seats for adults, and so forth. If you wanted that big cab in a smaller truck, like a half-ton truck or a compact truck, that wasn't available at the time. And so the thing I thought was totally obvious to do would be to make a smaller truck that could seat 4 adults, maybe at the expense of not being able to carry that much stuff. It turns out today that actually the best-selling trucks in America, the most popular body style, is a small bed and a large cab on a small pickup truck. So I must have had good taste. I mean, there are trucks like the Honda Ridgeline that only come that way today, which just tells you how popular that is. But, I got more and more consumed with school, and naturally I didn't have most of the resources I would need to start a truck company at the time. And so, I gradually went from, abruptly went from being out in the country, small school, no AP classes, not a lot of academic opportunities, to I applied to this place called the Illinois Math and Science Academy, which is a boarding school that costs only $2,000 a year, at least at the time. And the reason it costs $2,000 a year, despite having lots of fancy AP classes and custom problem-based learning curriculum and very advanced math, the reason it was so inexpensive is because there are only a few spots every year for students to go there. I think less than 200 spots for the entire state of Illinois. So I had to take SATs, I had to write essays. It was basically like what I'd actually now call a harder version of applying to college to get in there. I was super fortunate to get in, and it was a life-changing experience for me. So besides becoming much more engaged in school and so forth, I really realized that I do have the right skills to become an engineer and not just run a truck business, but actually engineer trucks. It's also worth noting that we, out of 15 people, we have 15 people at DeepScale today. One other came from my graduating class at IMSA, and we have lots more folks who are interested. So I anticipate DeepScale to be a bit of a mecca for the IMSA alumni mafia in the next years. So when I graduated from IMSA, I went to University of Illinois, and actually close to half my graduating class went to University of Illinois. So it was like the engineering school to go to in Illinois at the time. And I initially, trying to figure out what my major would be, what I wanted to do, what I wanted to study, I thought I was going to do mechanical engineering. So I started, trying to take classes in that direction, hanging out in the mechanical engineering building. And I wanted to do mechanical engineering because I thought I could then do something related to cars, maybe designing engines, who knows. 2 months into my experience as a yet undeclared, but probably going to be a mechanical engineering student, I went to my first career fair, and the most interesting internship opportunity that anybody would describe to me, much less hire me for in mechanical engineering, was setting the idler controller, calibrating the idler controller for a cargo van produced by a major American automaker. And if that was the most interesting thing I could find, I just wasn't that interested. And the more I looked into, at least at the time, mechanical engineering, I mean, the building is super old. I felt like a lot of the things that we were working on, or that we could work on, were constrained by some mix of what materials you could afford and just good old physics. And the automotive industry was similarly constrained at the time. Automotive wasn't on the map the way it is today in terms of where high-tech people think about going. And it was all a bit slow-moving for me. But I just happened to get kind of a part-time gig in the computer science department at University of Illinois. And my job was to, first create the Twitter account for University of Illinois Computer Science. Remember, this was 2008. And then my job was to write articles that kind of summarized what kind of research people in the department were working on. And as you can see here, I mean, you saw the mechanical engineering building. This is a little bit nicer. It doesn't even really fit in the screen without like a telephoto lens. You can't walk far enough back before hitting another building before. So this is a distorted telephoto lens picture because it won't fit in the screen otherwise. And by the end of that first semester, this seemed a lot cooler. I already had learned some programming in high school. And, the fact that this is the Siebel Center for Computer Science, I mean, Tom Siebel had started Siebel Systems. For those who don't know, that was a formidable and quite successful competitor to Oracle in the 90s. As an entrepreneur interested in, among other things, making money, this all appealed to me. So I ended up declaring my major in computer science, which back then was just about filling out paperwork. Today you have to launch, if I hear, kind of a whole lobbying campaign to get into computer science if you're not there from the start. But yeah, so went over to computer science, worked hard, and started doing research. So by my second or third year, I'd taken some graduate classes in the department and started working with some grad students on their projects. And another difference, versus 2008 to 2012 era versus today. Today, there's so many undergrads. Grad students are sort of have their pick over which undergrads to work with. Back then, I was kind of the only undergrad who was interested in research, as far as I could tell, in my department. So I could kind of bounce around between different groups, try different things, get on, kind of help out with different papers. And so I actually ended up publishing a couple papers in the sort of distributed systems and high-performance computing area, so making highly efficient software, as well as the area of computer vision, right? So got my hands dirty with real research, published in academic conferences, exceeding the state-of-the-art levels of results in various problems. And so eventually it came time for me to think about what to do next. So when I got close to graduation, I started to look at what my peers and other people who had recently graduated from our department had done afterwards. And what I saw was a pattern of sort of two key directions. One was taking entry-level jobs at big companies, so kind of, big ground floor software engineer type of role. And I'm dating myself. I mean, Microsoft, Google, and Facebook, and believe it or not, Zynga were kind of the hot places to go at the time. And I looked more into, the jobs that were offered to me, the ones that my friends took. What really did these jobs consist of? And at Microsoft, the people, some of the people who went to Microsoft for my class really did sit there and grind out incremental detail after incremental detail to add to Microsoft Excel. And as a big picture person, an entrepreneur turned engineer, this just had zero appeal to me. Similar story, even at Google, which is known for being a bit creative. I mean, adding little micro things into ad optimization pipelines, it just wasn't for me. And I just couldn't imagine, more importantly, how this would help me on my path towards becoming an entrepreneur. And the other big category here was starting companies. So I couldn't do this slide without mentioning Malwarebytes. So unbeknownst to me, the co-founder and CEO of Malwarebytes actually started the company while he was an undergrad, sitting next to me in class. But I didn't know this. Today, I actually, commuting in the South Bay from my house in San Jose to our office in Mountain View down 101, I actually drive past Malwarebytes as skyscraper every day. So clearly, there has been some success in that direction, but that's definitely the exception. So what most people were doing entrepreneurially, in some cases as a hobby and in some cases as a business, was building smartphone apps of some sort. That was the hot thing. So a representative example of this from this era in 2012-ish is my friend Matt Gornick, who's actually an entrepreneur I respect a great deal and have learned a lot from. He started a company called Orange QC, and their whole thing is, cleaning people, janitors basically, they walk around with a clipboard and write down all the things they cleaned as well as what needs attention. Orange QC, from what I understand, basically made an iPhone app and an iPad app for that. Actually, from the perspective of optimizing product market fit, finding a real problem, solving it, and monetizing that, they did great. They continue to run the business to this day. I'm very proud of them. But there are two boxes that places like Orange QC just didn't check for me. The first one is, remember, I had just been doing highly novel and sort of off. I've basically been working on discovering new things in computer science research, right? That's what I had spent all my time that I wasn't studying for exams in undergrad pretty much doing. And so going to something that's more, building a UI but not really having a lot of deep technical aspect just seemed like, again, not something I was that interested in. The other problem with a lot of these is one difference, probably even today, between Silicon Valley and everywhere else is everywhere else there just isn't necessarily this innate desire towards world domination and taking over the global market and whatever it is that you do. And that's what I wanted to do. Fo's truck company wasn't going to be some podunk thing. It was going to be, trucks everywhere. So there was this other option that none of my classmates, from what I can remember, really spent much time looking into, which was a PhD. So there were a few people doing fifth-year masters and so forth, but actually forging a career in research wasn't something that was on most people's radar. And as a result, I got some help from advisors and professors and so forth, but it wasn't like there was some big party of folks in our department preparing their grad applications. I was there by myself doing it. So I'd been doing research, decided to do grad school and see what technologies I could become an expert in that maybe we could ultimately commercialize and build that highly technical, world domination-oriented company. So here I am starting my PhD at Berkeley, just up the hill in Soda Hall. I'd applied to a number of places, was fortunate to get in everywhere, including Stanford. But this, part of why I picked Berkeley is because I found my future PhD advisor, Kurt Koitzer, shortly before making a decision on where to go to school. And Kurt is a fairly unique person. So first of all, his research aligned with mine perfectly. So Kurt had been doing research at the intersection of high-performance computing and computer vision, which were my two passions from a research perspective. So he was basically making the fastest computer vision systems that you could make. The second reason I really liked Kurt and wanted to work with him is because he's highly entrepreneurial. So he was actually one of the early engineering hires at a company called Synopsys, where he ultimately became CTO, and Synopsys then went IPO, and then Kurt stayed on for quite some time, but eventually got recruited out of Synopsys to become a full professor at Berkeley, which he described as a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. So Kurt had all this entrepreneurial skills bottled up and happened to be doing exactly the research that I wanted to do, and so it was a natural fit. So Kurt and I wrote a number of papers in this direction towards building fast and lightweight computer vision systems, principally using deep neural nets, which as of 2013 kind of just came on the stage and swept away most of the previous work in computer vision in terms of kind of the accuracy side. And we were on the ground floor of this, not just making high accuracy systems, but making ones that you could deploy practically on very small computational footprints in a cell phone, for example. So after publishing some of these papers, I got basically a cold email from a place called Microsoft Research. And so Microsoft Research at the time was similar to what Bell Laboratories was in the 80s or Facebook AI research is today. It was sort of a mecca. It was basically academic heaven for those who are interested particularly in computer science and even more particularly AI research. So I got this cold email, had a 30-minute phone screen, got a job, summer internship at Microsoft Research, on the spot from that phone screen. My wife happened to is also now has a PhD in computer science and ended up choosing an internship that summer at Intel, and we were both headed up to Seattle area for that. So at Microsoft Research, I ended up, basically my routine was myself and a few other interns would sit down every week with not just one, but these 5 experts. These at the time, really some of them could be counted as world's greatest living authority on their particular piece of their field. And so we would sit down and basically think great thoughts about what problem could we solve that's at the intersection of a few of these, natural language processing, computer vision, and deep learning, for instance. And what we came up with was, and by we, there's several of us, I did my little part, right? But what we ended up doing is making a deep neural net that takes images as input and writes a caption about the image automatically. So this is an area, the merging of vision and language that had been not explored that much, and there were some real opportunities to do new work in this area, and we made the system, and now it's actually one of my top-cited papers. So you'd think every single aspect of this, Microsoft Research being like academic heaven, working with all these great people, working on cool problems, that would have been one of the highlights of my career. I'm a little bit disappointed in myself to say that it wasn't. So when working with Kurt at Berkeley, we were kind of 50% time entrepreneurship, 50% time research. So besides writing code here and there, my role in this group ended up being, and by the way, nobody invited me to do this, the voice of reason in terms of who's actually going to use an image captioning system and for what. And nobody was really interested in that question. We had 10, 15 people around the table. I was kind of the only one who was spending some of my spare time talking to business units at Microsoft, but hey, could you use this for something? Thinking about what we could do practically with this technology. And so the lack of kind of practical orientation for me was frustrating, and told me that despite Microsoft Research, or today Facebook AI research, being heaven for some researchers, it really wasn't what I was looking for. So on my nights and weekends at Microsoft Research, I started working on my own stuff again. So I worked on a number of different ideas. The one that really stuck for a while was one called VisiBlend. That's what we called it. And basically the idea was we would scrape or download a lot of YouTube videos. We would use deep learning to identify what products are in those videos. And then we would help advertisers buy ad placements on the right videos that actually match their product. And at the time, in 2014 or so, there was this sort of general perspective around here, and even more so down in Silicon Valley, on if you could do something in advertising and get in the middle of that advertising pipeline, you could just print money. So it seemed like a natural opportunity. And so in the last couple weeks of my summer in Seattle, I had finished my Microsoft Research internship a couple weeks before my wife finished her internship across town at Intel. And I was kind of hanging out, working on this more or less full time. And I decided to talk to Kurt about it. We've been talking about it, as an idea. I decided that I was serious. So I told Kurt, on the phone, I think I'm ready to drop out of the PhD program and really focus on VisiBlend. I think I've taken this PhD thing as far as I can. If you want to be an advisor to DeepScale or advisor to VisiBlend, that's great. Nice knowing you guys, but this is what I'm going to do. And Kurt came back with what probably are the 2 most important pieces of advice I've gotten in my entire career about entrepreneurship and maybe about anything. First, Kurt goes, Forrest, do you know anybody who would actually pay for this? Well, my answer at the time was, well, no, but advertising equals printing money, so we'll probably figure it out and get some business development people involved, and it'll all be happily ever after. The second question or second suggestion was, what if you were to focus your PhD research on the specific practical problems that you might face while doing deep learning at VisiBlend? And I still enjoyed my research, and I there were unsolved technical issues in applying deep learning to every single YouTube video. So sure, that made sense. So let me kind of go through each of these and kind of how I thought about each one and what my response was. So we're basically entering 2 parallel paths, where I'll first talk about what happened over the next year or so with respect to figuring out VisiBlend's actual strategy with respect to customers. And then I'll kind of rewind back and do the stuff that I was doing with the other half of my time in terms of research on these practical problems and what exactly we came up with. So on the VisiBlend side, I was once I found out about this program called Lean Launchpad at Berkeley, I was a little bit embarrassed that I'd considered dropping out at all. So this is the Lean Launchpad classroom in Haas, and that purple person with the blue or purple circle is me. And basically, the way this class works is you bring your startup idea, and you bring 4 people, team of 4 people, and your idea can be a little half-baked, but you have to have some guess as to what it is that you're going to make and who your customer is going to be. Like, what's your product and what's the market? But you can be wrong. It's okay to be wrong. And so the goal of the class is by the end, you will have kind of taken twists and turns where you say, hey, if I change the product like this, and I change my target audience like that, I actually have product market fit, which means I make things and people actually buy them. So I'm there with some of my teammates sitting on either side of me, and we would basically, our commitment in being in the class is we would interview 10 potential customers per week. And if you're a business-to-consumer company and your customers are generically consumers, like, I don't know, Berkeley undergrads, that job isn't so hard. Our customers were businesses, specifically ad buyers at brands and agencies. I didn't know. I'd never met one of those people before this. Fortunately, I had some teammates who joined me in this exercise who did know something about advertising with some experience there. But as we went through the different stages, from kind of initial guess at product market fit to more convergence, we took different twists and turns that I probably don't have time to cover, but the conclusion was sort of surprising. So the good news was we kind of figured out if this was going to work. We sort of saw who was going to work with us on this who would be the customer, basically. So it was basically going to be brands. So KitchenAid is an example brand. Agencies, Digitas LBI is an agency who helps brands like KitchenAid buy ads on the internet. And our first target platform to put the ads on was going to be YouTube, right? So we were going to help these types of agencies select the best ads that are most relevant. And one piece of good news is that we actually did some real studies where we bought ads. We had one control group where we placed ads on random videos, another group where we placed ads on carefully chosen, videos chosen by our automated software, and we got much higher engagement rates. More people clicked when it was a match. Now, let's talk a bit about what types of advertisers there are. So at a very high level, there are 2 types. There are what they call performance advertisers. They're the ones who, for every dollar they spend on advertising, they want to make more than $1 in profit, ideally, right? So the ads basically are part of how they drive sales. So they're counting what's the sales with respect to the ads. It's very, very numerical. The other kind of advertiser, the polar opposite, is what they call a brand advertiser. This is somebody who says, hey, I have such and such brand. I think this type of audience would like to engage with this brand, and over time I'd like to familiarize this audience with my brand. That's not a performance-driven exercise. That's more of a hard-to-measure exercise, honestly. So this is more the case where you put some billboards up, you put some stuff on TV. A lot of the TV ads these days get repurposed for YouTube. And it's really, the brand advertisers go, we did the best we can. Maybe we do some follow-up studies to see how aware people are of our brand and what it stands for. But nobody's driving clicks. Nobody's driving sales immediately. So YouTube and video ads, the big learning for us was there wasn't really a well-defined market for video ads that are performance-driven, that aim for more clicks and more sales. And that led to the conclusion that basically, with a couple of exceptions, eager customers that we found but didn't really have the problem, they liked us, but they didn't really have the problem that we were solving. Brand advertisers weren't willing to pay extra for more user engagement, and they basically didn't care about the problem that we were solving. So we went in thinking that, hey, we're optimizing this metric, we're getting more engagement, this is what advertising is all about. Turned out for the people who are buying YouTube ads and ads more generically on image media and video media, which is what we were good at mining, that wasn't performance wasn't a key concern. There was no culture around that. So that's what VisiBlend's conclusion looked like. And I should say this whole process from me saying I want to drop out and do VisiBlend to saying, hey, this isn't a product market fit situation, even after several minor pivots, took about 9 months. And I'd say all of us were part-time in this 9 months. And it's certainly better than having raised tens of millions of dollars, derailing my PhD, et cetera. I'm very glad that we took this route. So part two of this, so what practical problems did I actually solve that I thought we might face while doing VisiBlend in my research? So the first one was, as we scaled to training our deep neural nets across more and more videos, the time it would take to train in that, and by train I basically mean to take a bunch of data and an uninitialized neural net and make the neural net understand, how to classify things, for example, right? That went from weeks to months to, if we hadn't killed some of those jobs, it would have been years, right? And so typically, people train deep neural nets on sort of one compute system, right? So at the time and today as well, it's often some sort of graphics processor. So we looked into the research on distributed training. So what if we used 100 graphics processors or more than that? And the research that we found on this wasn't all that exciting in terms of the stuff we were reading about. So there was this kind of approach to having a central parameter server, which probably don't have time to explain it here, but we explain in our paper. It really doesn't scale that well. It's good for keeping lots of machines busy, but it's not that great for getting the job done that much sooner. So we came up with what at the time was a pretty pioneering approach of using a reduction tree, and we called the system that we put that reduction tree in Fire Cafe. So we basically train deep neural nets where each one of those black dots is a server. Every server does some training and then has, one other server it reports into, and you have sort of a tree where everybody receives two. The technical details are in the paper, but basically what this added up to was when we're using our own deep neural nets that we developed with speed in mind, and when we use as much as many as 256 GPUs, we get training done 150 times faster. So that's from months to hours, basically. In the paper, I think the best numbers we posted were around 50x, but naturally we kept improving after that. So that's where we were with distributed training. And so in a bit of what I might call a greedy optimization, Kurt and I went out and said, hey, I wonder who would buy basically distributed deep neural net training as a service. And so training deep neural nets at large scale was the original meaning of our name, DeepScale. So this is, in all its horribleness, one of the original slides we had that we showed customers. And basically the idea was you'd take your deep neural nets that maybe originally you were training on one GPU, we'd scale that out, you bring your neural nets, you bring your data, we train it faster than anybody else. We were going to build a whole cloud system around this where anybody could kind of submit jobs and do training. But taking the lessons that we learned in Lean Launchpad, I'm glad we first started to validate who would use this before going hammers and tongs on building it. So we started that exercise in terms of figuring out who would use this, talked to people in a few different markets that we were aware had problems with distributed training. And the one that really we got the most positive and kind of, I need this now, grab it out of your hand kind of reaction was the automotive industry. And automakers had at that point gathered lots of data, both collected and annotated or tagged lots of data, for training primarily computer vision models to be used in autonomous cars as well as sort of collision avoidance enabled cars or driver assistant enabled cars. And the people at the automakers, some of these were engineers, some were technical experts, some were key decision makers at the time, said training deep neural nets on the data volumes that they have was very slow, could take months, or even if we let it run to completion, years. And so I guess we could have been satisfied with this and said, okay, well that's enough validation. We'll go off and build that cloud service and see you in a few months. But I didn't have a clear spec for what that cloud service should exactly do. I just knew that we were supposed to train, or we convinced ourselves we were supposed to train deep neural nets faster than anybody else. So I would go back for follow-up meetings and talk more with these customers. And eventually, in each one of these discussions, it would get navigated away from the problem of fast training and into, Forrest, you seem like you know a lot about deep learning. What do you say you just sell us, this automaker here, the right deep neural nets? We'll train them, we'll put them in cars, we'll pay you for each car. How does that sound? Sound pretty good. And so that was one thing that the automakers really wanted. It was they have some deep learning people, but not enough deep learning people to solve every conceivable deep learning problem. And so as many of those as they could outsource and license from others, they were interested to do that. The other piece of this is, or the other piece of feedback that we got consistently from people in the automotive industry is, for prototyping vehicles, using lots of big GPUs is okay. But if you actually want to ship hundreds of thousands or millions of cars. We need to squeeze all this down onto embedded low-cost silicon, low-cost sensors, and so forth. So there's, in terms of cost, power, and computational capability, the gap between a full-size GPU and an automotive-grade processor, similar to what you'd find in a cell phone, all those factors is like a 100x gap, where the automotive-grade processor is like 100x, slower, less energy using, et cetera. So we basically went back to the drawing board with that and said, okay, we at DeepScale are at least going to entertain the idea of building kind of a complete shrink-wrapped solution for, or shrink-wrapped software solution for perception systems in autonomous vehicles, right? So we're going to take data from sensors, we're going to generate, accurate in real-time results of what's going on around the car. And so to do this, though, we needed kind of our own internal infrastructure to really be able to execute on that, because it's not like there were a lot of people out there who knew how to do this. So we kind of figured out there are about 4 key ingredients to this from a development perspective. So I already talked about training rapidly using FireCafe multiprocessor scaling. The other 3 are sources of high-quality training data that we can collect and annotate, small and efficient deep neural nets. Just getting high accuracy at unconstrained compute budgets isn't enough. And then being able to actually efficiently implement those deep neural nets on embedded hardware. So this is basically the roadmap that we set out for ourselves to get a sort of level up to the point that we could actually solve that end customer problem of squeezing the best deep neural nets onto tiny processors to ship in lots of cars. And at this point, I would say DeepScale had already transitioned from deep neural net training at large scale to scaling deep learning to millions of cars, or deep neural net inference to millions of cars. So in terms of data collection, we ended up, by this point, we'd raised a little bit of money. We were able to afford a very cheap lease on a very nice BMW that we ended up putting all kinds of sensors and stuff on and processors. So we have a couple LiDARs on this. Actually, 3 LiDARs are on there, a number of cameras, radars, et cetera. Some of those sensors are for sort of being proxies. They're similar to what are used in mass production. Other sensors, like the expensive LiDARs, are just there for research only, right? For, we can prototype there, but we don't have sensors like that are mass produced yet at reasonable cost. So that's kind of the data story, and this has since scaled out to us getting data initially from our customers' development fleets, and by customers I mean automakers and automotive suppliers. And then it's since been, or kind of the next enhancement is, as these cars get deployed at larger scale, we'll be able to absorb sort of interesting corner cases from the fleet that we can use to improve our models. We built our own framework that actually is open source. It's not the most user-friendly for random people, but it's kind of a power tool called Boda for implementing deep neural nets on sort of wacky little processors that most people consider to be too hard to program, but automotive manufacturers use them all the time. So we made our own deep neural net framework, our own computational kernels to kind of get that level of efficiency. And then finally, we ended up building our own deep neural net architecture. So like all these things internally at DeepScale, we've gone several steps ahead of what I'm able to show here in our published work, but sort of an early instance of our, showing the kind of thing that we can do with squeezing deep neural nets down is this model called SqueezeNet that we published a couple years ago. It consists of these Fire modules that are designed with sort of compactness in mind. And basically the takeaway from SqueezeNet is, as of 2016, there were a few people kicking around ideas in the research community about how to make deep neural nets smaller. These, those 4 things, with the top one being just no compression, the bottom 3 are, after applying some compression technique, making the deep neural net smaller, but ideally retaining the same level of accuracy when it comes time to, in this case, classify images. So the best technique at the time was called deep compression. It basically takes what then and maybe still now is the most widely cited deep neural net architecture for computer vision ever, which is called AlexNet, and compresses it down by a factor of 35. So it's 35 times smaller, but it's the same accuracy. And the way that deep compression does that is by deleting some of the parameters in the model that weren't really contributing to the end results, and then quantizing the remaining ones to far fewer bits. So instead of 32-bit, 5 to 8 bits. So this is quite effective. However, SqueezeNet retains the same accuracy But just by creating an entirely new model that we were able to create partially because we could train fast and get things done, SqueezeNet is a model that is 50 times smaller than AlexNet and doesn't have any compression applied to it. So it's just 32-bit floating point numbers. So at the time this was a breakthrough result, it sort of kicked off a whole research community or sort of energized a research community around efficient deep learning. And that's not also, we also worked with the deep compression people to squeeze SqueezeNet down further, to compress it further, to get a 510x smaller model that's the same size. So that's not 510%, that's 510 times smaller. So what used to be a quarter of a gigabyte is now half a megabyte. So this was basically the one of the early results we published. Internally at DeepScale, we've had, kind of 100 to 250x improvements, not just in model size, but also in terms of actual speed at the end of the day and so forth, on much more complicated deep learning applications than just image classification. But this is representative of the kind of thing that we've basically has become one of our superpowers at DeepScale. So to sum up this section, basically we came up with this whole full stack approach to train, design, train, and deploy deep neural nets at scale. And beyond that, in parallel to this, we were also working on refining our idea of the product market fit in the automotive space. So I want to share kind of one little story arc about the kinds of things that we've learned over the last year or two about perception systems in automotive. So in terms of cars you can actually buy today, they're not fully autonomous typically, but they have some driver assistance capabilities. They don't crash into the car in front of you. They stay in their lane. Tesla Autopilot has done a good job of describing what some of these kinds of features are. Fully hands-free on the highway, for example, with driver oversight. So this is the kind of use case that's in production today. And that little triangle that I've circled on the front of that car is a little camera-based system. So it's got a camera, a processor, and some admittedly old-school pre-deep learning software on it. So this basically is the state of the art in terms of what automakers can buy from their suppliers today. It's a fairly slow-moving field. These modules kind of get redone every 2 to 3 years, pending sort of changes in the hardware as well as the software. Deep neural nets have really only taken over the world over the last 5 years. So 3 years in AI is an eternity. And so these, based on what the automakers have told us, and as well as some evaluations that we've been able to work on, these have really fallen behind the academic state of the art, from what I can tell. And automakers understand this. And so we talk to automakers and automotive suppliers all the time who have basically filled their trunk with GPUs so that they can use the latest state-of-the-art deep learning models that they download from berkeley.edu/insert grad student website here, which from an accuracy perspective, I think nobody disagrees with the fact that on a number of problems, the accuracy of these modern deep learning techniques is much, much higher than what you can buy from the automotive supply chain in that tiny footprint. Now, nobody in the automotive industry thinks they'll deploy things like this. So that setup is a $20,000 plus server with 8 GPUs in it to support several different cameras, all running state-of-the-art deep learning. This is just an arbitrary example, by the way, this particular car. But you open up just about any autonomous car prototype in Silicon Valley or elsewhere, you'll find a very hot and expensive device like this. So this is kind of how things look right now. And I was just talking to one of the well-known sort of moonshot autonomous driving groups that we've known for a while. And they've sort of over the last couple of years gone from saying, like, we've got to get autonomous driving that works to we're at a point where, at least for certain applications, we're ready to scale. And our number one concern is power. And by power, they don't just mean reducing power, which is of course important, but also getting this down into power-efficient hardware that's low cost. So with DeepScale, this is basically a 10-watt sort of tiny little processor, and we've successfully shown a variety of deep neural net tasks that we can squeeze down from really big iron to these tiny little processors that automakers use day in and day out in mass production. And this basically is basically the key thing here is we are not so much about making the first autonomous vehicle prototypes. We're about whatever level of autonomy is ready to be commercialized, we're the people who step in to figure out how to make that efficient and on a budget, using our deep neural net model squeezing superpowers. So I'm getting towards the end of my time here, and so to summarize my entire story in one slide, I wish it were simpler, right? I wish I'd just gone from wanted to start a truck company, figured out this. Reality is, wanted to start a truck company, went to mechanical engineering, switched to computer science, and a big blow for me really was giving up my dream of going into automotive. Considered doing a startup, but chose grad school instead. Got into research in deep learning. A couple years later, started DeepScale. Graduated with my PhD in EECS. Had the kind of pivot in DeepScale strategy from initially focusing on just distributed deep neural net training to building efficient models for deep neural net models for use in automated driving. And today we are, I wish I could announce more. We have various announcements coming up, but we are on track to supply life-saving deep learning software to automakers. Not in 2021 or 2022, but we have deals that we're working out for next year. So a lot of Silicon Valley has these kind of broad, kind of big picture, we'd like in a few years to have autonomous cars. We at DeepScale have carved out key problems that we can actually solve in mass-produced vehicles soon, as well as working on, kind of supporting next-generation things as well. So I guess one thing, I kind of looking at this story arc, I went from wanting to start a car company to becoming an AI supplier to the automotive industry. And I think, I've thought about, would I rather have a car company? And the answer is no. I mean, there's a lot of really boring, well-understood, not particularly creative things that go into designing a car. The AI software is about the most intellectually engaging piece of building a car, so far as I can tell. So we basically are doing the fun, interesting stuff and leaving the regular stuff to those who understand it best. So we actually have something that I truly believe is better than any car company that I could have started. And, in his 2005 commencement address at Stanford, Steve Jobs said something really powerful, I think really applies here, which is, you can't connect the dots looking forward. You can only connect them looking backwards. So you have to trust that the dots will somehow connect in your future. And I think it's only been the last year or two that my dots have gone from a jumble to a very clear connection. So conclusions and advice. So a couple key things. So if you hadn't already figured out, I really believe that you don't have a business till you know not only what you're going to build, but who it's for and who's going to pay for it. At DeepScale, we spent a lot of time optimizing our product market fit, and it's really paid off. I think we're super clear on what we're doing, and it really makes sense to all those involved. As an entrepreneur, it's energizing to have a mission that you and your team believe in. So at DeepScale, it's really about using deep neural nets to save lives on the road. And of course, solving intellectually interesting problems to achieve that. If you don't know what your mission is right away as an entrepreneur, that's okay. I think as you optimize for something that you aim for product market fit, but you land on something that ultimately you're also interested in, otherwise you wouldn't be doing it. So there's a reason why you're doing it, even if you had a scientific process to arrive at what's something that fits between what you can make and what someone will buy. And the last thing I want to say here that I didn't add to the slide, but I think is pretty important is, entrepreneurship, for me, certainly isn't the easiest path I could have taken in life. But I think really it is the one where I have the most, at minimum, freedom, but maybe even more to the point, it's the one where I have the most ability to set my course in the future and really make sure we're making a difference. So I'll leave it there. Thanks a lot.
I'm just wondering if we can all call you Fo from now on?
I would tolerate that.
Great. So I know that there are questions out there. I have questions, but I'll let you all get started.
Yeah. And before we do, let me just throw up one more slide and leave it here. So we are setting up an autonomous driving dinner to be in Berkeley next month. So for those who are interested in this, certainly we're going to nerd out about the technology side more than the policy side. But if that interests you, even if you're not an engineer, we're happy to have you. We haven't figured out all the details yet, but email me. It's forrest@deepscale.ai if you're interested. To keep my inbox sane, try to use the subject line Berkeley Autonomous Driving Dinner. and I will keep my eyes out for those, and once we have the details nailed down, I will reply to everybody who has told me they're interested. Okay, question time.
Can I ask that, because Forrest is a Cal alum, that you just say what you're studying and before you start your question?
Perfect. Forrest, thanks so much for joining us today. So I'm a mechanical engineer, but I want to talk about the future.
Yeah, hopefully I haven't crushed your dreams too much. Yeah.
Forrest work already does to me. The question is, so one of the big things is that Ford and a lot of these other companies have changed their branding from being car companies to transportation companies. So how is this industry going to change? How will we and how we interact with transportation? How's that all going to change in the next year or 5 years to a decade?
Right. That makes sense. That's a good question. So the question basically is, how is transportation going to change in the next 5 years up to a decade? And of these companies like Ford, who are kind of rebranding as mobility or transportation companies beyond just vehicle companies, how does that fit in? So my sense is the following. So we are going to have major successes in the next few years in fully autonomous driving, which they call level 4. Actually, I have a slide that might kind of explain. So these are kind of the levels of automated driving. From the first 3 are driver assistance. The bottom 2 are no steering wheel. There may be no steering wheel in the car. The one that I think is really interesting on the full autonomy side is level 4. And the special thing about level 4 is, actually, let me give you a little background. Level 4 is under a certain set of constrained scenarios, the car can drive itself. Level 5 is the car can kind of do anything a human can do. Level 5, I think, is sort of an intractable problem given today's technology. But level 4, it's about creatively defining what is that narrow set of things, right? So you might define a train as a level 4 car that just happens to need tracks. Thinking outside the box a little bit more, I mean, you start to look at fully autonomous on the highway, I think. In my personal estimation, if there's a predefined way of getting off the highway and having the car shut itself down when it gets off, that counts as a level 4 car to me. You can start to monetize that through trucking. So there's a lot of debates about if you have a truck driver who's in the truck but not actually driving and taking a nap, can you keep the truck going, right? And if so, you can get more done. There are other, I think, specific opportunities in level 4, like there's a company called Voyage, which has, they've shown some pilot studies on retirement communities. Basically, they have not just a golf cart, but like a full-size, Ford Fusion sedan that drives retired people around. It's a nicely constrained problem. It's all at low speed. There isn't a lot of traffic. So I think doing the equivalent of a Lyft or Uber that could do anything that car can do in downtown San Francisco is about the hardest level 4 problem I can think of. But doing more deliberately designed level 4 tasks that play to the strengths of today's technology, I think, is going to be something that consumers will be able to use in the next less than 5 years. Does that make sense? Yeah. And then the other side of it is, I think that consumer-owned cars will be here for quite a while. Even if you were to say that fully autonomous Uber or Lyft vehicles were going to replace consumer-owned vehicles in cities, where I grew up, 7 miles from the nearest town, it's going to take forever for that autonomous Uber to show up. So I think there are a lot of edge cases where human cars are here to stay. Do you want to select questions, or should I do it? Or you can?
We'll start in the front here.
Okay.
So a couple of months ago, companies like Uber and Lyft, they signed. They essentially suggested that autonomous cars should only be shared fleets, and personal autonomous cars should not exist, and it will go against the mission of autonomous cars. There was a lot of disagreement about that. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, we build the perception piece, and you can kind of do whatever you want with it, right? So.
Do you mind? It's hard. I think it's hard in the back to hear.
Oh, am I losing the microphone?
No, you're okay. But do you mind repeating the question?
Thank you. The question is, places like Uber and Lyft are sort of the opinion, you say, which I generally agree with, of the opinion that the real short-term application of fully autonomous cars is for fleets, not for consumer-owned. I think there is a specific application that those companies are totally focused on, which is making it so you can exit one building in San Francisco, get in a car, and enter another one, and that's going to be fully autonomous. That's what they would like to do. It's actually a pretty hard problem. So I think for that case, fleet-owned has various advantages. You can kind of amortize more cost of sensors and hardware, for example. There are benefits there. from a business model perspective. Basically, I think trying to put limits on what an autonomous car can do is kind of like trying to put limits on what counts as a computer in the 1960s, right? In the 1960s and 70s, there were so many ideas for what a processor could be, so many ideas about how to design an operating system, so many ideas. So, I think autonomous driving is actually more of an explosion of diverse approaches rather than, hey, we at Uber think you should just get with the program and do an autonomous urban taxi. I think that's what Uber wants to do. It's actually just one application.
So I was just kind of curious, you've gone from doing a lot of research in computer science now with running a company. So I think it'd be very interesting to talk about that switch in your day-to-day and how you handle that, if it's what you kind of wanted and things like that.
Good question. So the question is, how have I handled the switch from being a researcher to being a founder and CEO at DeepScale? I would say what I'm doing now is what I was born to do. In grad school, I had sort of 80% overlap with what a grad student should know how to do, and that was decent. But I had a lot of customizations to grad school that made it something that worked for me, right? So I had this magical advisor who liked entrepreneurship. Grad school, at least at Berkeley and EECS, feels a bit like Montessori school, where you just kind of choose your adventure anyway. So, I chose an adventure that I wanted to be on. I don't know that I took the same path in grad school as most students would have done. So I found my own way in grad school, but DeepScale, I feel like, by virtue of me having been the first person there, is naturally over-optimized for my style. I guess also maybe a natural question is, do I code anymore, right? I don't write any code that is on the critical path for production. I dabble a little bit occasionally, but my biggest coding contributions these days are more, trying to help people get unstuck and so forth, as opposed to actually owning some implementation feature.
How about right back in the middle?
So do you think the biggest barrier towards scaling automation vehicles is going to be technical in nature, or going to be more of a policy?
Great question. So the question is, which factors will be the biggest barriers to scaling autonomous vehicles? How much of it will be technical? How much it will be more on the society side, right? So I actually think there are a bunch of non-technical issues that are really important here, ranging from big picture things to how does insurance change to handle autonomous vehicles? How do we get to a point where we have a fairly consistent definition of what autonomous vehicles are allowed to do that aren't just defined differently by every municipality or state? So those are definitely issues. At a small picture level, there are issues like, humans jump out in front of cars all the time, and if they learn that autonomous cars will stop, then that will just get more extreme, right? So some sort of societal sort of adjustment in how do pedestrians and autonomous cars interact. There are tons of those problems. And I think part of why at DeepScale, I guess if I haven't already been clear, when I talk about our technology potentially being in mass-produced vehicles next year, I'm actually talking about driver assistance. And the full autonomy stuff, our technology is more in prototype vehicles, because for full autonomy, that's all there is at this stage. So I think the folks who are betting their entire future on full autonomy, particularly things like an autonomous urban taxi being ready in a couple of years, I think stand to lose a lot more than we do. We're flexible on which level of autonomy we're powering.
So what's next for DeepScale? So now you're working on autonomous vehicles. What's next after that?
Good question. So what's next for us after autonomous vehicles? Well, so to put things in perspective, so my numbers may be slightly out of date, but last time I checked, the advertising industry is about a $500 billion industry, I believe worldwide. Hopefully I'm right about that. And that's what powers much of what exists in Silicon Valley. Facebook is ad-driven, Google is ad-driven, et cetera, in terms of their revenue. Transportation is conservatively a $3.5 trillion industry worldwide. So that's 7 ad industries. So our culture at DeepScale revolves around a few principles, but one of the main ones that helps us to do such Herculean pushes for building entirely new things is focus. And so we may someday find that there are other wheeled vehicles we'd like to be in, maybe even aerial vehicles. But at this point, we stand to gain much more over the next few years, both as a company and for society's sake, in fully following through on what we're doing, as opposed to trying to throw more irons in the fire.
How do you keep your pulse on developments in the autonomous driving industry, and how can you predict where its future direction is headed? Are there like other industries that might serve as a proxy to better understand?
Sure. Got it. So how do we keep a pulse on the autonomous driving industry, and are there other industries that could serve as a proxy? In terms of keeping a pulse, I mean, we have key people ranging from engineers to very senior folks from companies that have these autonomous driving goals in our office at least a couple times a month. Multiple per week, rotating through, So with good coverage from a bunch of them, So I think we get a lot of our most valuable information firsthand, to be honest. And really listening to what the goals are, what the status is, where people are stuck, has taught me far more than what you read in the news. I feel like what you read in the news with autonomous driving is, a scenario or a situation where nobody really admits weakness. And what you see behind closed doors, there's some really hard problems that we actually can contribute to solving. And as a proxy, I'm not sure. It's kind of the Wild West, I would say.
For example, like drone industry.
Sure. So I think on the technical side, right, we certainly do both attend and publish at conferences, and now we seem to get invited talks to these conferences and stuff at CVPR and so forth. So I think we've been very fortunate to be, since before DeepScale, very well integrated into these research communities that are often ahead of the industrial state of the art on the core technology problems.
So I'm just struck by the fact that it's mostly guys who are asking these questions. But it was interesting when you were working up at Microsoft, there was a woman who was responsible for language.
Yeah.
But I'm curious from your perspective. I don't know who works at your company, but what role do you think is important for women to play in this industry? Because when cars were being made, it was all the guys too.
Right.
So,
I think everybody should play all the roles.
do you look for? I mean, you need certain skills, but do you wish you had more women working?
Of course. Yeah.
Do you have any women working?
Yes. Yeah.
And what are they focused on?
Engineering, business, etc.
Do you notice? I mean, does that bring something different? I'm just curious how the diversity on your team, whether it's gender diversity or not, how that makes a difference in how your products come out.
Yeah. How does having diversity on our team help us? I think so. Let me answer two versions of that question. One is how does diversity help us build perception systems for autonomous vehicles and commercialize that, right? So I think socioeconomic background, gender, and all these things contribute to diversity, but also having people with different schools of thought from different institutions also helps a lot, right? I think in autonomous driving land, there are some folks who start with, we're first going to focus on being really perfect at localizing where the car is on the road, or my car is on the road, called self-localization, and then we'll sort of tack on other things in addition. There are others who say, we'll first start with, the core problem here really is mapping, and then we'll kind of populate the map with data that's from our perception system. And there are lots of different people who are such and such system-centric, and then other things are like implementation details to them. And the reality is it all matters. So having someone for whom, from their academic upbringing is the thing to focus on is such and such. They're probably right, but it's one of 7 things. So that's the intellectual diversity side. I think in terms of socioeconomic background, gender, and so forth, type of diversity, I wish I had some clear statement about it. I think all of us are really just trying to do our job and be creative in terms of designing the technology and the commercialization plan. So, yeah, I don't know if I have a clear proof point on that, but I also don't know where I would be without it.
How did you find your co-founder? Or did you,
Yeah, so how did I find my co-founder? So my co-founder is Kurt Koitzer, my former PhD advisor. So yeah, something I forgot to mention is so I started the company with Kurt. Kurt's actually since retired from teaching at Berkeley. He's now an emeritus professor and still does some research on campus, has graduate students and so forth. But he's taken the time that he used to spend on the teaching side and is spending it at DeepScale. So it was an ideal outcome for me or for us.
could you expand on how you grew the team in the early phases?
Sure. So how did we grow the team in the early phases? I would say up to about 10 people. We really, we tried to ramp up kind of external recruiting, but we mainly ended up sourcing from our networks, right? And Kurt and I both knew a lot of smart people, and then those smart people knew other smart people who are interested in this sort of thing. And then now, we're at 15 people now, and now we actually spend a lot of time on sourcing and sort of, more broad recruiting. I think another thing that's been really important to us is what they should teach in Lean Launchpad as well, or if there were a part 2 of that, would be you need product market fit, but you also need recruiting market fit. Right? So when you're recruiting, you have a product to sell, which happens to be called a job, which has this great property that you get paid to use it, but you pay with your time, right? So I can only hire people who really find value in that job. And similar to product market fit, where you're searching for different categories of people and what problems they have, where they might work, you do the same thing for recruiting. So for us, one of the most important attributes that seems to determine fit at DeepScale is if you want to be an entrepreneur eventually, if you want DeepScale to be your last job before you start your billion-dollar company, and you're really into engineering, marketing, whatever the role might be, you'll probably end up being very happy with DeepScale. On the other hand, if you never had any interest in entrepreneurship, we have a couple people like that who just like other aspects like the intellectual engagement of the projects and so forth, but you're probably less likely to find this to be a fit, right? So naturally, we early on, start to sort of optimize for people for whom we will add value to their career by helping them learn entrepreneurship, and then they can go off and do their own company.
Don't actually have someone who's grilling them all the time, the way the professors or the VCs grill you. How does that work?
I see.
How do you scale that?
Yeah, so the question is, so the Lean Launchpad class at Berkeley, the people you took Lean Launchpad with and you know that methodology of searching for product market fit. Do you have to train the rest of your team as you scale your company to do that? So so product market fit is one of the first things you need to confirm that you have a real business that's worth scaling. Once you have a real business that's worth scaling, you use that same product market fit search methodology that they teach in Lean Launchpad to keep refining it down to the level of a product manager or a business development manager may use those principles to keep refining, but do I need to build that feature first or that feature first? Or does this feature need to look like this or like that? But you're not doing a major pivot, frequently. So at DeepScale, we keep the engineering team, the other teams up to speed on this, and they certainly can weigh in. And I think they have learned a lot from seeing the business side do that process. I would say that for our first, when we were, say, sub 10 people, I really pushed the engineers to sit in more of the customer meetings so they would see what questions we were asking and learn why, and we would sort of workshop that. Now that we're kind of 15 people and growing quickly, we've reached a point where for those who want to be an entrepreneur someday, they certainly should learn that skill, and I'm happy to help them with it, and they have opportunities to do it. But honestly, not everybody in the company needs to be doing product market fit search all the time, because at this point we know a lot of the answers. There are more to discover, of course, but not something that requires 15 people to be out discovering. Yeah.
Obviously, this is a highly competitive space, and trade secrets are very important. So you wouldn't want to share those trade secrets by publishing. You shared information that was a few years old, but you've since improved it. Have you thought about making connections with people in non-competitive industries in order to share the technology and enable them to use the gains, but not compromise your competitive advantage?
Got it. So the question is, sort of what's our strategy around what to publish, what not to publish? Are there creative things that are we could share some of the technology discoveries with people in other industries, but not competitors? I think our current strategy, and I think it's working out fairly well, is for each new innovation that's substantial, we do periodically sit down and say, do we think we want to keep this as a trade secret? Do we think we want to patent this? Or do we think we want to publish it? And we publish it, we often also consider putting the code online and so forth. So the ones that we publish, we have more of those in the pipeline, often are things where it's like, we want to show the research community a promising idea that researchers can then go and improve, and then once it's super good, we'll come back and squeeze it down and put it in cars. So there's kind of an interplay between, sometimes we're the customer of the research community, right? We figure out a problem that's important. We publish examples of initial solutions to that problem, maybe even with code that can be modified by researchers, and the researchers can build and build and build, and at some point, ideas will come out of that roll back into our proprietary solution. So that's a common paradigm, I would say, for us.
Cool. Let's thank Forrest for taking his time to explain all his work. And he'll stick around for any questions if you guys want to come up and chat with him.
Yep, I'll be around for a while.